Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm glad you could all make it. So this session is improving the cybersecurity of New Zealand. And really, cybersecurity is something that's quite important to everybody. Individuals nowadays are really focused on being able to protect and manage their own information that's online. Governments sort of see this really as the new battlefield as far as intelligence collection, and also been defending their systems and networks as well, both the government systems but also nationally critical infrastructure and other things. And corporates also are placing a lot of importance on this as well, being able to protect their intellectual property, their data, also the data and that of their customers as well. And the threats that all these organisations face are very real. It's not just stuff you sort of see in movies. We've had some earlier sessions today, but also yesterday, talking about the threats that are out there. But it is the likes of nation states. They see this as a way to, conduct corporate espionage and activities that they've always conducted, but they can do this virtually. Organised crime, they still conduct all the traditional activities that they've conducted in the past: identity theft, fraud, money laundering. They're just able to do this now virtually. And as well, for hacktivists and other individuals that want to get attention to their causes, they're able to use the internet quite effectively for their means too. So there's a lot of interest in this space, both from the offensive and the defensive. And there's a lot of discussion about this space, but often it's behind closed doors. It's good today, I think, to have an open sort of discussion about this. And one of the reasons that sometimes this space is really discussed behind closed doors is, if you look at it from a government perspective, it's because that the information that they're dealing with is sometimes that sensitive that it'll be classified, so they're not in a position where they can maybe discuss it more openly. Also, if you work with, say, in the security industry, there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation that happens there. But again, it's only through those trusted forums where they trust the person they're dealing with, that they're going to be able to manage the equities that they've got, that they're going to understand what they're sharing, and it's not going to come back and bite them or get them in trouble with the organisation or further afield. But it is important to be able to discuss these things more publicly. So the goal from this session is these sort of three prongs. The first is really to better understand the current issues that we're facing today as organisations, as individuals, as governments. To really discuss the different roles of the different sectors. What is the role of government in this? What is the role of industry? What is the role of ourselves as individuals? And then really having a look at some different initiatives. There's a couple of different initiatives we're going to look at: a cybersecurity survey and some work to try and remove malware off basically citizens' computers. So we'll come to those later on, but there are a couple of sort of proactive initiatives to try and improve things in this space. But one of the exercises, I actually wanted to start with a bit of an exercise and a bit of a sort of an opening thought. And the opening thought really is that everyone has a role to play in the cybersecurity, of their own cybersecurity, and also that of the larger sort of internet ecosystem as well. And so I've got a little bit of an exercise to maybe sort of get us thinking about, hey, what role do I play and how proactive am I in this? I'm hoping that by being here, you've got an interest in security, and hoping that you're in a position where you're working to manage your own security as well. So what I'd like everyone to do is to basically raise their hands. And as I go through these questions, if it no longer applies, then drop your hand, and we'll kind of hopefully see, some hands at the very end, but also get an idea for sort of how everybody's sort of looking to manage things themselves. So the first one is, who has their operating system on auto update? So I'm hoping most people would, because pretty much by default now out of the box, that's how they come. And then the next question, so keep your hand up if this applies to you, is who has some form of backup in place for your information and your data? Cool, good to see lots of hands up still. So keep them up. So who's secured your wireless internet connection? That's a good room. So the next one hopefully applies to all as well, is keep your hand up if you run some form of antivirus on your computer. Brilliant, a couple of hands going, but most of them up. So the next one is, who regularly changes their passwords? Yeah, a little bit of pain when we get to something like that. We have to be a bit more proactive. And the next one is, who recently checked the privacy settings on their social networking sites they belong to? Yeah, won't be many there. And then the last one is, I'm sure there'll be a few still, but who's recently checked that the firmware on their phone or their modem or their router at home is up to date? There's a few there that's good to see as well, and I think we do have that technical audience. But you can see very quickly, as soon as there's a lot more that's required of us to do these things and be more active. It's nice when the operating system automatically updates and provides you with AV and does these other things. But as soon as we have to start doing things like changing our passwords a bit more regularly, and there's no real cost or pain to have to do that, and as soon as we have to update the modems, or phone software and things like that, the level of participation does start to drop off. So that's sort of my opening thoughts of where I think this sort of topic should go. So I really want to open to the floor and any comments or questions or thoughts? Mike? We have a mic for Mike.
Just something that occurred to me during that exercise. So one of your questions was around securing your home Wi-Fi. People will do that and answer the question based on their own knowledge. So there's a challenge right up front. So we have probably a fairly large portion of the population who think that they are doing the right thing, who think that they're doing the security that's required of them. Whether they are or not, they're probably not the ones to judge it.
Yeah, it's a good comment.
And actually, a little bit further to that, one of your questions about antiviruses. Well, on my home PC, I happen to be running Debian testing, and there are no known viruses for Debian testing, so no, I don't have an antivirus. I don't need one at the moment. So you've got to be really careful about the preconceptions you take into these sort of places, right? You go in and you say this, okay, now we all know that Macs and Windows machines are heavily targeted by the malware writers. I happen to be running an obscure operating system which is not so heavily targeted, and so I have a certain amount of latitude on that. My Wi-Fi network, hey, I've got an air gap in the power cable on that. I switched it off because I don't particularly want microwave radiation. I take enough risks with various things around my life without worrying about having microwaves coming from my feet. But again, you've got to sort of look at what is a reasonable precaution to take. Now, you mentioned changing passwords. Now, the thing is, if you have got a strong password and you limit where you use it, you don't need to change it. If you're changing your password every month, it means you're trying to think up a new password every month, which means you are going to pick weak passwords from time to time. You're much better off investing a fair amount of time choosing a strong password and using it for one site only. You can get software tools that will actually help you by automatically generating strong passwords for various sites if you want to use those. And again, once you've created that password, there is no point changing it unless you have reason to believe that it has been compromised.
And that, I think, is the hard thing. Most people, and we see this all the time with the large amount of credentials released on the likes of Pastebin, most people are not going to know until it's too late. By regularly changing your password, you're buying yourself, well, you're affording someone that compromises it only a limited window in which they can make use of it. So choosing a strong password is great, but choosing a strong password for life, I don't know, I'd recommend that as a current strategy.
Any other comments over here?
So to weigh in on the password debate, what I will say first of all is that there is many different opinions, and you could get a room full of people who we would all decide we're the best experts in the world, and none of them would agree on an appropriate password policy. But what I will say is that in my experience, the biggest problem with passwords is reuse, in that if I go and join the NetHui website to register online and I set my password to my ultra-secure 3,000-digit long ABC123, and then for whatever tragic reason it turns out the NetHui website is accidentally pasting all their passwords on Pastebin, suddenly I also find that my Facebook account, my Twitter account, my bank account and everything else has all been compromised. Reuse of passwords is, in my humble opinion, the biggest threat to online security.
Yeah, the comment from the floor there was just asking any LinkedIn user about that. Can we just be mindful just to use the wait for the mics if you've got comments, just so those online can also hear and participate as well.
There's actually a really easy way of getting around that. You have a standard, very secure password, and you have 2 digits, 3 digits at the end, which somehow relate to that website for you to remember to flick it on. So you could have, your password then, because it's the NetHui at the end, you just put NH or, NI, take random letters out, and it actually really gets around that issue. You still have a standard-based password, so it's easier for you to remember, but then you have something unique for each.
And I think it kind of maybe comes back to one of the earlier comments, something with passwords, we might not all agree on the same thing, but I think everyone maybe needs to think of something that they have themselves, something they can do to sort of manage that and understand, again, the issues with reuse is a big problem there, and making it easy to remember and keeping it to that complexity. Peter.
Could we possibly move on from the password debate, because it's going to be a perpetual motion machine that will consume the entire session?
Yes, have you got some thoughts or comments that could move us along?
I'm not even going to begin. So.
Yes, microphone at the back, please.
I work for TradeMe, and I'm in the team that takes down the phishing sites that target our membership. And I just want to comment on how I've seen an increase in collaboration between internet service providers and the companies that get targeted by phishing sites, particularly banks. I think that's a really good thing. The internet service providers that we contact about trying to mitigate the harms of phishing sites have began in 2010 by responding within a matter of hours, sometimes days, and now we get a response time of minutes, and they appear to have picked up quite well on collaborating with people who get targeted, or companies and agencies that get targeted by phishing sites, and get them taken down quite promptly.
Why do you think it is that there's been that improvement and increase in time over the last few years?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I think that they've, I know in the case of Vodafone that they've got a team specifically set aside for responding to requests to have IPs moved so that they're blacklisted from being accessible by their customers. Certainly that's the case with Telstra Clear as well. Telecom's got a lot better also in doing that. It just seems to be a natural progression towards responding to these requests much quicker, and it's been for the good.
You think as well, maybe because of the relationship you've formed, that there's a trust there, they know who they're dealing with, and they know who's making these requests, so they can sort of work to them that way?
Absolutely.
Who else would like to comment? Mike, at the front, please.
I think one of the big points about that last comment is the collaboration. It's a cat and mouse game. We're racing to respond. The criminals, the miscreants, will always think of new ways to get around the protections, the safety measures that we put in place today. So we need to have the relationships in place already for the occasion that somebody tells us the next attack is happening or some passwords are being leaked via some other mechanism. For us to be able to respond quickly, we need those relationships in place before we have to call on them, and we have to have spent the time to build up the trust, again, well ahead of time, so that it is already a trusted relationship, so that the response, whatever it is, because the way that we respond to the next incident will probably be vastly different to the way that we had to respond to the last one.
And I think trust is something that really underpins a lot of the people that are proactively working in this space. They're really willing to work with others, but it's really something that needs to be vouched for. But there are quite a lot of successful sort of trust groups that have been established in New Zealand and internationally as well, that New Zealand's able to plug into. And they are all built around trust, that basically you're vouching for someone to be on that group. And if they do something wrong, then you're also risking your membership of that group to be sort of removed as well. And it's quite an effective model, because it's sort of, sometimes when people say, hey, what should I consider when I'm vouching for someone? It's like, well, would you give them your credit card and your PIN? You trust them that much not to sort of abuse that or abuse information you're passing. And it's sort of a good litmus test to think about, because I think you really have to have that trust there, so when you share data with them and information, you're ensured that they're not going to go and share it further afield, or they're going to do something inappropriate with it, or move it on, or that someone's going to use it for commercial gain or other things that would obviously have a bit of a backlash. Bruce?
One thing about trust, and it was fired off by the comment that was made over there before, and that is, what is it with all these phishing emails? I mean, who believes when they get what claims to be an email from their bank that's sent from a Yahoo Mail address, and you have to go to a URL that ends in .ru, who really believes that's from Westpac? It amazes me. I see these things all the time. I mean, I don't have a Westpac account, so I'm reasonably sure this can't be genuine. But, there's basic, simple things that people are told again and again and again, and that is that if your bank writes to you, they won't start with, hello, customer 123 or whatever. It'll be, dear Bruce. Or if your name's not Bruce and you're not that fortunate, dear whatever your name happens to be. But the thing is, why is it that people, at the moment something is on a screen, they believe the most preposterous stories and they fall for these scams? Some princess in Nigeria whose father left them $umpteen million. People fall for it. They must be falling for it. They'd stop sending me the emails.
So I think the last session probably went into that a lot of detail. I see Peter's got a comment.
Yeah, my response, I mean, there are people who believe the government's run by aliens and that we're going to be taken off planet by UFOs. So, of course, a small percentage of the population is going to fall for absolutely anything. And it doesn't, even if 99.9% don't believe it, there's always enough to make it worthwhile. So that's not really something you can fix, and it's not something to be surprised about.
Tony, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, probably the majority of the people in this room would look at a phishing email and treat it as such. But what you have to understand is people approach it from different perspectives, and people's email inboxes are personal and private places where they read personal and private communications. We see a lot of information at the Department of Internal Affairs through the spam units about phishing emails, and people maybe just don't pick up on the little nuances that technical people do. And a lot of our work is around providing that education, providing that information, trying to help them with the issues that they see in front of them, and putting a lot of publicity around that as well. We have some very good, strong networks with the banks now that we're working hard on developing all the time. We have some good information sharing with the banks in relation to phishing attacks as well. And we know that their mechanisms are a lot quicker for takedowns, but that still doesn't stop us or prevent us from sharing that information and working collaboratively with them across phishing emails that we see quite a lot.
Michael, have you got a comment?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the reality with phishing scams is they are as sophisticated as they need to be. I've seen phishing emails that range from things that just, really stand out as being a scam to stuff that, if I hadn't had my morning coffee, I'd probably fall for. The same goes for websites, and you've even seen the same with the mule part of it. Some people, think they've fallen for a job scam, and they might be desperate or greedy, but then you see the example of someone who was selling a car who got paid too much, got asked to refund. They just get more and more sophisticated. The reason those scams are not particularly sophisticated is because they don't have to be. And what you see in the pattern of people who fall for these kind of scams is that they are people who don't have great computer skills. So they tend to be probably older, probably a little bit, not very confident with the computer, and they can't tell those subtle cues that will put the rest of us off. And that's why those people fall for scams and not us. So I think, that phishing and stuff will go on perpetually. In terms of what we do to make a more secure internet in New Zealand, the bit that really worries me is actually malware. And, one of the things, we talked about antivirus. One of the things, I think antivirus is a really difficult topic for security professionals because you can never say don't run antivirus. But actually, antivirus will, for a whole bunch of people, it's a really effective control, but it only stops half the problem. Sophisticated malware will beat antivirus. The best thing you can do is actually have, your computer up to date, have your software up to date. But even then, zero-day vulnerabilities are there, and what can we do at a service provider or a network level to help people understand when they might have been infected with malware? And that's where I think we should probably put our effort.
Might be a good adjunct to maybe get Vikram to talk about the removing the malware initiative, if you'd like to do that. Could we get a microphone over there, please? Thank you. So one of the initiatives, the NZITF, New Zealand Internet Task Force, because we do have a number of working groups set up, and one of them is focused around this sort of problem. And I sort of asked Vikram to come along today to sort of talk about that. And
maybe I'll come in front.
Yeah, please. Thanks.
So just talk about the working group.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Vikram Kumar from Internet NZ, and what we did was with the New Zealand Internet Task Force, the NZITF, they set up a working group to look at malware. And it's quite a wide effort, so we've tried to involve people from inside the cybersecurity community, but also businesses, ISPs, from government, and trying to get this multiple perspectives on how we can look at malware in New Zealand. And we've just had one meeting, so it's really early days, but there's two areas that we've identified for what we think is early focus. The first is that the New Zealand police at the moment have a pilot with 3 small ISPs where if anyone's website is serving up malware, And so typically what would happen is that if you've got a website and you've got perhaps advertising from a third party, then without your knowing it, you might be serving up malware from those advertisements. And it's quite hard to detect as a website owner because all you see is advertising being served by a third party. But what happens is that people who come to your website, quite often without doing anything else, simply visiting your website, could get infected. And so the New Zealand police have a pilot going on where once those websites who are serving up this malware get detected, the police would send them a notice. And they've got legal opinion to say that they can do that. And one of the first efforts of the task force is to try and expand that effort because the police don't have good sources of data at the moment of compromised websites, whereas the people who've got that data don't have the legal means to send out those notices. And as the police say, when you get a notice from the police, you tend to take it more seriously than if you get it from anyone else. Because what you don't want is scammers then sending those notices and it's all over again. So that's, I think, one area that we see some ability to make some early movement. The second area where there seems to be a good possibility is that individual ISPs at the moment, when they're notified that a particular IP address, which they translate into a customer account, is infected, the range of reactions is from picking up the phone and talking and helping them to ignoring it. Many small ISPs simply do not have the capacity or the commercial incentives to remove the problem. So a consistent approach across ISPs is something that has successfully been implemented in Australia called the I-Code. And we think that in New Zealand a better solution is, rather than have a self-regulatory code, is to have ISPs working together so that everyone can define what's the best source to get the data, what's the best practice to send notices and help customers, and then what's the best way to feed that information back to government so that if there's a malware provider overseas, they can be shut down. So that's a summary of the two initiatives, and if there's anybody who's interested in joining up, talk to me, Paul, or anyone else. We'd love to have as wide a participation as possible, and we've just had one meeting, so you're not going to miss out anything. Has anyone got any questions, comments? No?
I think one comment I've got on that is that the sort of couple of statistics maybe just to be aware of in this space is that they say about of websites that host malicious software, about 80% of those are actually legitimate websites that have been compromised. And in New Zealand, the number that we've sort of last recently tracked, and this is going back a year or two, was around about 500 sort of websites at any given time. There were two research initiatives that were looking at that, and they're both coming up with a similar figure. So it's not big numbers we're actually talking about. So it's actually something really quite, I think, quite achievable to be proactive in that space and actually start cleaning that up. And cleaning up that side of .nz, that where people know that when they go to .nz websites that they can be trusted, that they're not going to get compromised. So I think it's great that the police are getting involved in this, and we've got Cliff from the police over there, sort of who's leading that work and through this working group. So thanks.
Yeah, I think just the other number is that the estimate of the number of zombies or number of infected computers is around 50,000, somewhere in that region, and because the New Zealand internet hasn't been that great, it hasn't been that big a problem. Why would you, if you're a global player, you hardly look at New Zealand with its slow internet and data caps to be the place where you want to have your command and control service, for example. But as we roll out fiber and as we roll out quicker speeds, and hopefully as data caps go up, we've actually potentially getting a much bigger problem. And we've now got this window of opportunity to start at least reducing that 50,000 number down to a much more manageable number. Okay, thank you.
I'd say 50,000 is still a bit of a problem. 4 or 5% of all ISP traffic is not a small issue by any means.
No, it's not small, but it's something that, from a global scale, it's okay. New Zealand isn't known to be a source of problems globally. But we may well become one, which is the problem. And 50,000 is, at the moment, nobody knows. That's like sort of best efforts. I suppose once we start working, we'll know much more. But yeah, that's the first number we've got.
So any thoughts or comments on that from anyone? Thank you, Vikram. Mark?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think what NZITF and Internet NZ are trying to do with this working group is a really good idea. I think most of us in the room probably agree that New Zealanders on the whole are pretty good at keeping their noses clean, and I'm talking about ISPs and the service providers in New Zealand. Most often when we're victims of scams, they're not hosted locally. They're offshore based, and I guess that's where, being New Zealanders, we can only do so much inside the New Zealand environment to keep ourselves clean and to know that we've got a good rep and that we can have a little bit of faith that the .nz site or the New Zealand centric site we're talking to is safe. I'm looking forward to seeing that working group eventually be in a position to liaise directly with overseas network providers, law enforcement organisations, and again try and throw a bit of weight behind the fact that we don't want to see our population victimised by the countries and service providers who are far less organised when it comes to nailing their own compromised machines in their midst. So I'm really keen to see what the working group's going to be able to do, because I think they're doing excellent work. It needs to be done. As Vikram says, it's going to get worse before it gets better in the view of high-speed connectivity. It's becoming ubiquitous. But we do also, I think, need to consider what we as little old New Zealand can do to make sure the rest of the world is paying a similar level of attention. Great to be leaders, but we do need everyone else to follow us.
Hi, Mark. Mark and I work together. Just to move things forward as well and kind of come off malware but talk about leadership. One of the things that Mark and I we do together is email security, and if you look at our level of domain forgery measures, things like SPF or TLS or DKIM, they're much lower than world standards. So we were talking about phishing before, and I think there's been a lot of discussion around privacy in the keynote. We had a conversation where the organisation had a privacy policy, but actual implementation didn't actually match what their privacy policy stood and what it said. And if you look at some of the banks, we don't have SPF implementation or DKIM implementation or sender ID implementation in the domains in their DNS. And we've got, I think, globally, you've got a level around 50 or 60% SPF implementation. In New Zealand, it's around 10 to 15%.
So just to sort of explain what those are,
so
they may not be aware.
Mark, I'll let you take over on the explanation of SPF.
just at a basic level.
I did try to explain it, and he said you got far too complicated in doing that last time, so
okay,
I'll take his advice and let him hand it.
So I'm trying not to make this a commercial pony show, all right? Yes. So SPF sender policy framework, I'll explain that one. It's probably the easiest one to explain. The concept is that you publish a record in the DNS, so where you have your MX record and your A record for your website, you also publish a TXT or a text record, and that record specifies some things about your domain name, specifically where email sourced from your domain name is authorised to be sent from. And you can do that by way of IP address or by host name. And you then put a flag on that rule that says that if a recipient sees an email with a from address of that domain or an envelope sender of that domain, but does not come from the records that are indicated in that SPF record, that it should not be trusted. And that's real basic, right? If someone's sending you an email which pertains to be from at nbnz.co.nz and you're a National Bank customer, then you're going to pay some attention to it because it could be the real thing, right? But if nbnz.co.nz has an SPF record that says that only the National Bank network is allowed to send email from nbnz.co.nz, then if your mail service provider is doing SPF checks, they're going to reject that email outright. It will not get to you. Or it'll get to you with a big warning on the top of it that says, warning, this message didn't pass sender verification. And that's going to tell you instantly that the message probably shouldn't be trusted. And the key thing with SPF is, for those of you who have ever used a forwarding rule on a mailbox and have decided to have mail forward from your old address to your new one, SPF can break that. There's been some learning curves for some people implementing it. but it's a real basic sender reputation validation that people should be using. Most certainly anyone who deals in finance or online trading or anything where money's changing hands should be using SPF. And I agree with Matt in that if you're out there and you own a domain name, you should have SPF records published. If you don't have them published, I'm quite happy to explain to you how. But again, education, not only from the end user's perspective, but also for the people who operate networks to protect themselves. Beyond SPF, we can go into digital key signing, DKIM. We can go into sender ID, which is kind of Microsoft's version of SPF. But that's kind of the basic idea, is to provide some means of validating that the email you received actually did come from where it claims to be.
Comment from Dean up the front.
Yeah, kind of think after you put that sort of stuff in the DNS, you should look at signing the zone through DNSSEC as well.
Nice plug there. You've got a comment over here.
We're just looking at, these are a bunch of technical solutions.
Yes.
I see that there seems to be quite a need for education at sort of a published TV ads, that sort of level, to educate the whole population on what they can and shouldn't trust on their computer, because you're not going to get around the problem that people make mistakes. People don't even look at the sender address, and maybe if we could just help people wise up to some of that.
Yeah, I think user education is certainly a big topic, a hard topic, but I think we're very fortunate in New Zealand. We have NetSafe, and from the NZITF, New Zealand Task Force perspective, we just want to redirect people there and just keep reinforcing that as a resource, as that go-to place. We've got a lot of great materials there, and I think they're the ones that are probably in the best place in New Zealand to really try and understand what those issues are. And I think it's two-pronged. It was maybe a comment that came this way earlier as well, that I think it's a generational thing that will happen as well. Right now, our kids are coming through a lot more cyber savvy because they've had computers from a young age. They're a lot more innate. I think they're going to be a bit more aware of scams just by default because they're used to these systems. But it's sort of the older generations that maybe aren't as familiar, haven't grown up with these technologies, aren't as comfortable with them, and a bit outside of their bounds, so they're not going to be as cyber savvy. So I think as much as education can work, it's also just going to be a time thing as well, because that shifts. Is there a comment on Cliff?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to take it back a little bit to the working group. The police have been trying to improve the scene as far as crime prevention and botnets are concerned and so on. We found that working with the NZITF has helped us to expand that as well, which is great, and we want to continue doing that. We found that multi-agency approach is very good for us in the sense that we're trying to reduce crime across the board. But maybe this is a little bit of a pun out for you guys to say, if you've got ideas about crime prevention initiatives and you think that it might be helped by the police, or we might be able to work together to do that, whether it's to do with through the email or spear phishing or whatever it is, then we'd be interested in hearing about it. We can't promise anything because we're only a small team, but we'd be really interested to hear about it, and please do approach us if you do have some ideas.
I think we're sort of been having a bit of a talk around like some of the issues and identifying what they are. And I think sort of the comments that came from Matt and Mark as well were about identifying some technical problems in New Zealand that could maybe be fixed with an ISP level, within a corporation level, to make things better. And so I think it's sort of a nice adjunct into the sort of cybersecurity survey work that the New Zealand Tech Task Force has been doing, because there is a big lack of understanding about what some of these issues are, and if we can better understand them, then we can start working with those focus groups, getting materials, either supporting NetSafe or others to better inform and to actually sort of improve the space. So Zara, I might ask you to come up front if that's all right. Have we got a mic somewhere? Yeah, so can we just grab that and I'll come back to you afterwards, just to sort of talk about the survey and get a bit of context to why it's been run and what they're looking to do. Thanks, Zara.
Hi, so my name's Zara Champion. I actually now sit within the Super Ministry, so I'm actually chairing one of the working groups, as we said, the Cybersecurity survey for New Zealand. I think you all may know that there was this computer crime and survey published in 2010, and so what we're doing as a group is using this information that we have here to actually, I suppose, better or actually inform our actual companies or public. So I think we're very aware that there are a number of international surveys. There's also a number of surveys that sit within New Zealand. And I think what this working group is doing is actually taking that information and making it really relevant to New Zealand and to New Zealand businesses. And I think the key things are actually looking at what New Zealand does well, what New Zealand does, some of the weaknesses that New Zealand companies are doing, and then being able to target those gaps and actually take that information forward to the key organisations or places. So I suppose for myself and this working group, there's of course two parts to survey, and I think the key things around are actually making the survey relevant for the people who are filling them out, making sure the right people are going to fill out the survey, make sure it's relevant, make sure it's not too long and lengthy. We're looking at ways of actually reaching out to you. Is it an online survey? Is it paper form? So there's a whole range of ways of looking at that. And also we want to make sure this data is relevant and useful. I'm really big on these actual results then become relevant back to the companies so that companies can actually benchmark themselves against similar size organisations across New Zealand. I mean, my real focus is around, of course, the educational sector. I'd really like to be able to take part of the survey back to the universities and actually drive where our students are coming from, what kind of skill set they need, but also industry skills as well as their courses that are lacking, or have we got the courses, have we not got the people? So for me, I have a real passion in one part of the survey, but there's also, looking at other parts. Are we monitoring within the companies? So there's a whole range of things we can pull out of there. So that's kind of just a bit of an overview. As I said, I'm the chair. I'm surrounded by very knowledgeable and great people who are actually doing the work. I'm just keeping them honest. So really what we're looking for is if anybody's interested in being involved, if they've got some feedback, if they've got gaps or information that they're looking for in their business, we're certainly open to hear that. So I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add.
No, that was great. Are there any sort of questions or comments relating to sort of the likes of the survey for New Zealand, what you'd want to find out from it, what would be relevant to your organisations?
So we'd like to put the survey out we're probably looking around that September. We'd probably like to see the results coming through and some actual summary of the results around November, the end of this year.
I think a key thing with that is really getting information for decision makers, both in industry and government, really giving them some metrics around the size of the problem, where the issues are, where the technical shortfalls are that we can look at improving on, where the skill set shortages are as well. So we can then work with the universities, providing them some good data about, this is what industry is looking to recruit over the next period, potentially helping encourage them developing courses in this space. So it's sort of looking to come in, I suppose, a multi-pronged sort of approach and canvass the space in New Zealand, trying to identify what the issues are and the shortcomings, but also what we're doing well.
Yeah, and sorry.
No.
So I'm completely supportive of the survey, as you might guess. The expectation that I have, or the need really, is for that New Zealand view, because we're not short of surveys. Every big company does a survey. There's almost a season of global threat and security surveys that come out, but it's very hard to take those international surveys and use that as kind of research and justification for spending money and having people spend time on mitigating the threats that are identified in these surveys, where they have a world map that may or may not even have our whole country. So the stats very rarely even talk about New Zealand, and if they do, it's such a small component of these global surveys, we can't use it. So keen to get a New Zealand view.
Absolutely, and I think that's exactly the driver in here. And, I'm certainly not standing here saying some of the areas of the survey are my expertise, but I know that when I went to the university to set up some new cyber courses, and they go, well, tell me exactly what the skills shortage is, what are we wanting in the next year, what are the, what companies require X, Y, and Z, and that's when I'm like, I spoke to such and such, and that would be really nice to hand them and say, we need 100 of these, we need 10 of these, and we need 50 of these, and this is the postgraduate, and that's the kind of, for me anyway, that's kind of the numbers and the stats that I need. But the survey covers a whole other area of aspects which will then become powerful to drive, that knowledge, absolutely.
And I think it's been mentioned that the numbers, you might have said sort of 4 or 5% of internet users may be compromised, and maybe that's quite low compared internationally. But one is, I think, yes, let's try and work to reduce that, and two, actually, if we don't do anything about it now, that's just going to grow. So I think we're in quite a fortunate position where the number is quite low. So let's work quite proactively. I think let's work together on this to try and keep it low as well. And I think it's going to take that concerted effort right across the board, both government, industry, as well as individuals themselves have all got a role to play in this. But I think in New Zealand, given the fact that we are quite isolated, we do have a limited number of gateways. We've got a lot of things that work in our strength. Quite often we see, I think, our size as New Zealand as being small, that it can work against us. But I think in situations like this, actually, it can be a strength because we can get together in forums like NetHui and other groups that exist as well, and these trust groups, and get all the key people in the right room to actually have these discussions about how we can take it ahead. So I think the surveys are going to be a great resource, hopefully, in the coming years. Thanks. So we've got about 5 more minutes until the session's due.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to flag a possible solution or idea about improving security, and I've put it up as a bar camp for tomorrow afternoon, and that's the concept of trying to get chief information officers or security officers in large organisations, talking to each other, probably through an intermediary, about data breaches. So not mandatory data breach notification to customers, but getting that data breach information out to everyone else who's running similar systems to you. We just got owned and it looked like this, but in a way that can't be attributed back to you, because senior managers don't like that kind of attribution. So that's Friday afternoon. If anyone wants to come along and talk about that, and either tell me I've got a dumb idea or how to make it good.
Sort of in that theme, is there a way to do responsible disclosure which isn't too sort of risky for a private citizen if you know of a security problem and it's like, well, I could tell them, but then they might send the lawyers after me or hassle me, or I could just carry on with my life. A friend of mine asked me to ask this, but I have done that once, and they ignored it. They just said, no, that's not a problem. And I said, yes, it is. Look at all these photos. And they went, no, that's not a problem.
I see Marie Schroff's in the room at Privacy Commissioner.
Well, I could just put it on Pastebin and tell the whole world, or I could tell the affected organisation and they could fix it. And if they don't, then I could tell the whole world.
Well, it's hard to respond absolutely without, knowing of, say, a detailed situation. But I mean, responsible disclosure should be okay. If you see that there's a particular situation going on and you can see an agency can fix it, well, there almost certainly will be a way for you to do that. Yeah, I mean, it may fall under all kinds of protections. Like, for example, if it's a law enforcement issue, then a responsible citizen certainly has a duty to disclose that to whatever agency, whether it be me or the police or whatever. So hard to say without knowing an exact situation, but in principle, probably yes.
So if I have a duty, do I have any protection, or do I just have to say, hey, I found this problem, I accessed some other people's photos, yeah, I shouldn't have done that, but you shouldn't have let me. Like, I'm already on shaky ground. It would be nice if there was a way to do that anonymously.
Well, it sounds a little bit detailed to me, but I mean, if you find something bad and you draw it to the attention of the appropriate people, you'd almost certainly have some form of protection, yeah.
And Debbie?
No, I was just going to pick up and say that I think one of the key issues is to have a way of remedying an issue, and to pick up on another Internet Task Force working group, which is the Crest and everything associated with that. I think the problem is if there is a problem to be fixed, where do you direct people to actually get it fixed? And one of the issues is not being able to really recommend anyone, or who do you have confidence where you send people. And so I think the other initiative that will help with this is when you have organisations and people certified through Crest, you actually have a way of actually directing people to places where they can actually get those solutions put. And I think that's part of the solution, needs to be that final step, and that it's not a self-interest where you're sending people, which some organisations, we'll tell you there's a problem and we'll fix it for you, and that undermines some of the message. So I think that's another good initiative that the task force is working on as well.
I think a comment as well, where you can report things anonymously. Obviously, you've got to be careful about what you do and what kind of research or what it is you may have stumbled over, but the ORB, that NetSafe run, which is the org.org.nz, is a place where you can probably be a little bit more anonymous with what you're reporting. And they've linked up with, I think it's around 8 to 10 government agencies and other entities that they will then flow that through to the right entity. So whether it needs to then go to the police, or is it the National Cybersecurity Centre, or to the Privacy Commission or Anti-Spam Unit, they'll filter that off. So maybe that's a good point of call again as well, to direct people that way. So we're almost out of time.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's a really tough situation if you're a consumer and you've discovered a vulnerability and you report it to the organisation who's responsible for the system and they don't take you seriously. I think that does put you in a difficult situation. And like you say, the trusted intermediary is the best way. But for those of us who work inside organisations, one of the things I'd suggest is actually you need to think about responsible disclosure upfront at the time of procurement. If you're going to buy something from a solution vendor, think about what happens if you do some security testing on that solution and find a vulnerability and report it to the vendor and they don't take it seriously. I've been aware of situations where vendors have had privately reported vulnerabilities and done nothing about it, and security professionals have said, okay, we're going to make full disclosure, report it, this is an important issue. The vendors turn around and said, not under our NDA you're not, mate. So, you've got to think about, before you sign up to that terms and conditions which says, non-disclosure, think about a carve-out for responsible disclosure. And it would be really good if that was standardised somehow, and organisations started putting that same clause into all their contracts with vendors. I think that would be a great thing.
That's a good suggestion. Any other comments or thoughts on the floor? I think we've got 5 minutes to go. Right? Yes.
Sorry, I didn't address your anonymity point. I mean, it's important to remember that the Privacy Commissioner, rather appropriately, has very strong protections available to cover the course of investigations and who did what and that sort of thing. It is not subject to the Official Information Act, for example. So if you complain to us, you will get relatively strong protection. But that wouldn't cover your sort of situation. I'm talking here about personal information type problems. Business information, that's a different matter. But it does occur to me that there might be something in consumer law that would cover that kind of, vulnerability, bad product sort of situation. If someone's actively promoting a bad product, then there would almost certainly be some recourse in consumer law.
Any other thoughts or comments at all? Okay, well, thank you all for participating. I think this has been a good session. There's been some good discussion. Something that has been mentioned a couple of times was New Zealand Internet Task Force. And Mike and Tony, are you guys able to stand up? And Dean, if you're interested in getting involved with some of the stuff that's being discussed with our initiatives, myself and these gentlemen are some of the board members. There's 7 of us on the board. But do grab us and have a chat afterwards if you'd like to get involved in any of these or help support them, or you've got ideas about things we should do. I think it's been a good session, but I think really it sort of reinforces the fact that this is something that needs to have that multi-stakeholder engagement. It's got to be collaborative. Government has certain mandates and laws that are available to them. Industry have certain systems and access that they can engage that might not be available to government. And citizens also have that role to play as well as individuals, whether it's reporting things or just being mindful of their own safety, of that of their websites and their own personal data and things. So it's definitely a collaborative space, and I think in New Zealand we're very fortunate that we can actually get together in forums like this and other forums. We can get everyone together in the same room to actually have these discussions and get all the relevant people together to sort of debate this, to discuss this, and try and find ways that we can move forward. So thank you for all attending.